The search for the unknown has always been part of human nature. Since the beginning of time, people have ventured into unexplored areas, driven by curiosity, the desire to conquer new territories, or simply the spirit of exploration. However, while some of these expeditions led to extraordinary discoveries and significant changes in the world, others have been marked by tragedy. The unknown can be cruel, relentless, and many of these journeys of exploration ended in disaster. In this video, we will explore the stories of some of the most disastrous and tragic expeditions in history. Men and women who embarked on adventures around the world, facing extreme conditions, hostile territories, and often the unknown. They set out with hope, but found only despair and, in some cases, death. Let's begin with one of the most tragic and mysterious expeditions in history, the Franklin Expedition. In 1845, British explorer Sir John Franklin embarked on one of the last great missions of discovery of the 19th century, finding the long-sought Northwest Passage, a sea route that would connect the Atlantic to the Pacific through the Arctic. The expedition consisted of two ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, with a crew of 129 men aboard. Equipped with the most advanced technology of the time, the ships had provisions for 3 years, which seemed sufficient for the long journey through the frozen waters of the North. However, after leaving Greenland, the two ships disappeared. For years, no word was heard from Franklin's crew. What happened to the men aboard Erebus and Terror became one of the greatest mysteries in the history of exploration. What is known now, after more than 150 years of searches and research, is that the ships became trapped in the Arctic ice, and the crew tried to survive the extreme conditions of the polar environment. The Arctic winter is unforgiving. Sub-zero temperatures, strong winds, and long periods without sunlight make any attempt at survival difficult. The supplies began to run out, and the men suffered from scurvy, malnutrition, and hypothermia. Several rescue expeditions were sent in the following years to try to find Franklin and his crew, but all failed to locate them. Only decades later did evidence begin to surface. Reports from local Inuit tribes mentioned white men traveling under terrible conditions, many of whom died of starvation. Eventually, human remains and expedition equipment were found on various Arctic islands, revealing a scene of despair. Some bodies showed signs of cannibalism, suggesting that in the final stages of the expedition, the survivors resorted to extreme measures to try to survive. In 2014, the mystery took a new turn when HMS Erebus was found at the bottom of the sea, off King William Island, Canada. 2 years later, HMS Terror was also discovered in excellent condition. These findings provided new insights into the expedition's fate, but many questions remain unanswered. What exactly led Franklin and his men to their deaths? How long did they resist? And why did the expedition, so well-equipped, and so tragically? The Franklin expedition continues to fascinate historians and explorers to this day, a testament to how the desire to explore the unknown can often lead to fatal outcomes. In 1846, a group of American pioneers decided to head west toward California in search of a new life and better opportunities. Known as the Donner Expedition, this group of 87 people was part of the great wave of settlers trying to cross the United States, venturing into unexplored territories. Led by George Donner and James Reed, they set out with hope and enthusiasm. However, a fateful decision would completely change the course of this expedition. During the journey, the group decided to take a shortcut known as the Hastings Cutoff, which promised to shorten the trip by about 200 miles. This decision, however, was a fatal mistake. The shortcut was much more difficult than anticipated, and instead of shortening the journey, they ended up delaying the expedition by weeks. As they approached the Sierra Nevada mountains, they were caught by an early snowstorm and trapped by enormous layers of snow, preventing any advance or retreat. Trapped in one of the harshest winters ever recorded in that region, the members of the expedition began to face food shortages. The provisions ran out quickly, and they were forced to slaughter their pack animals to survive. As the weeks passed, the animals were gone, and hunger began to ravage the group. The intense cold, combined with the lack of food and adequate shelter, caused the death of many pioneers. As the winter progressed and the situation became desperate, some members of the group resorted to an extreme measure: cannibalism. The bodies of those who died from hunger or cold were used as food by the survivors. This desperate and dark act became the symbol of the tragedy that was the Donner Expedition. By mid-February 1847, the rescue and team finally reached the survivors of the expedition. Of the 87 members who began the journey, only 48 survived. Many were severely malnourished and traumatized by what they had faced. The story of the Donner Expedition quickly spread across the country, shocking American society at the time. The tragedy of the Donner Expedition remains one of the darkest and most tragic episodes in the history of the American West. It exposes the vulnerability of humans in the face of relentless nature and shows how seemingly small decisions can have devastating consequences. The shortcut the group chose, which seemed like a practical and promising choice, ended up sealing the fate of dozens of lives. Expedition of Robert Falcon Scott to the South Pole in 1911, the race to conquer the South Pole was in full swing. Two explorers led the race to be the first to reach the southernmost point on the planet: the British Robert Falcon Scott and the Norwegian Roald Amundsen. Both had similar ambitions, but different approaches. Scott and his team, in the Terra Nova expedition, set out with the goal not only of reaching the South Pole, but also of conducting a series of scientific experiments along the way. However, their journey would end in one of the greatest tragedies in the history of polar exploration. While Scott and his team were in the middle of their journey to the pole, Amundsen took a more direct path, focused solely on reaching the pole as quickly as possible. He used sleds pulled by dogs, a strategy that proved highly effective in the harsh Antarctic conditions. When Scott and his men finally reached the South Pole on January 17, 1912, they realized that Amundsen had been there weeks before. The pride of being the first was shattered when they found the Norwegian flag planted in the ground, marking the victory of their rival. Disappointed, Scott and his team began the long and arduous journey back to base camp. The return journey was a true test of endurance. Facing extreme temperatures, which dropped to minus 40 degrees Celsius, cutting winds, and a terrible lack of food and supplies, the group quickly began to succumb to the harsh conditions of Antarctica. One by one, Scott's team members began to die due to the cold and exhaustion. Edgar Evans was the first to die, followed by Lawrence Oates, who, debilitated by severe frostbite, decided to sacrifice his own life in an attempt to save the others. His famous last words, "I'm just going outside and maybe some time," became a symbol of heroic sacrifice. Scott and the two remaining men, Edward Wilson and Henry Bowers, fought until the end. They set up camp just 12 miles from a supply depot that could have saved their lives, but were caught in a relentless snowstorm that kept them isolated. Unable to continue, they died in their tents, surrounded by ice and snow. Their bodies and diaries were found months later by a rescue team. Scott's records revealed his determination and despair in the final weeks of his life. In his last entries, he wrote a letter to the British public, defending his men and asking that they be remembered with honor. Although Scott's expedition ended in tragedy, he is often remembered as a tragic hero. His story is one of courage, sacrifice, and resilience, even in the face of impossible circumstances. The spirit of exploration and the quest for the unknown, which drove Scott and his team, inspired generations of explorers, even if the ultimate cost was their lives. Dyatlov Pass expedition in January 1959. A group of 9 experienced skiers set out on an expedition in the Ural Mountains in the former Soviet Union. Led by Igor Dyatlov, the expedition aimed to reach Mount Otorten, a remote and challenging area that few dared to explore. All the group members were students or former students of the Ural Polytechnic Institute and were well prepared for the severe conditions they would face in the mountains. However, what began as a simple skiing adventure soon turned into one of the most mysterious tragedies in history. After several days without any communication, a rescue team was sent to search for the skiers. What they found shocked the world and sparked decades of speculation and conspiracy theories. The group's tent was found about 500 meters from the slope of a mountain called Kolet Syakhl. which in the local indigenous dialect means mountain of death. The tent was strangely intact, except for the fact that it had been turned from the inside out, suggesting that the skiers had rushed out in an attempt to escape something. Worse still, they had fled without adequately protecting themselves from the extreme cold, many of them barefoot or wearing only light clothing, which seemed completely irrational behavior given that the temperatures in that region dropped below -30°C. The bodies of the skiers were found in different areas around the tent. The first 5 were located a short distance away, and most had died of hypothermia. However, some shocking details emerged as more bodies were discovered. 2 members of the group had skull fractures, while others had severe internal injuries such as broken ribs, but no visible signs of external trauma. One of the bodies was missing its tongue, further deepening the mystery. The conditions in which the bodies were found raised numerous questions. How did the skiers suffer such severe injuries without signs of struggle or external marks? Why did they flee the tent in such adverse conditions, apparently without any apparent reason? Additionally, some reports indicated the presence of high levels of radiation on some of the victims' clothing, leading to speculation about possible secret military tests in the area. Others reported the presence of light spheres in the sky on the night of the tragedy, leading to theories involving extraterrestrial phenomena. To this day, there is no definitive explanation for what really happened at Dyatlov Pass. Over the years, various theories have emerged, ranging from avalanches to military experiments, and even the possibility of a wild animal attack or a supernatural event. The lack of conclusive evidence and the bizarre nature of the event have fueled the imagination of people around the world, making this tragedy one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in history. In 2020, the Russian government concluded a new investigation, suggesting that an avalanche was the most likely cause of the skiers' deaths. However, this explanation has not convinced everyone, and the Dyatlov case remains a topic of debate and theories. This expedition is an example of how the unknown can hide unexpected dangers, even for the most well-prepared explorers. What really happened that cold night in the mountains remains an enigma, perpetuating the fascination and mystery surrounding Dyatlov Pass. Shackleton Expedition in 1914, British explorer Ernest Shackleton launched one of the most ambitious expeditions of the heroic age of Antarctic exploration, to cross Antarctica on foot. He planned to traverse the frozen continent from the Weddell Sea to the Ross Sea, a journey that had never been attempted before. However, what began as a mission of conquest and glory quickly turned into one of the greatest survival stories in history. Aboard the ship Endurance, Shackleton and his crew of 27 men set out from South Georgia in December 1914. However, as they approached the coast of Antarctica, the Endurance was captured by the thick ice of the Weddell Sea. For weeks, the ship drifted, trapped in a vast ice field, while the crew patiently waited for the ice to melt. But the Antarctic summer was unforgiving, and instead of releasing the ship, the ice began to crush it, slowly squeezing the Endurance. Finally, in October 1915, Shackleton made the difficult decision to abandon the ship, which was soon swallowed by the ice and sank. The crew was now stranded on the ice, hundreds of miles from civilization, with no communication and limited supplies. What followed was an epic struggle for survival in some of the harshest conditions on the planet. Shackleton led his men for hundreds of miles across the ice until they reached Elephant Island, an uninhabited piece of land in the middle of the Antarctic Ocean. Knowing that there was no chance of rescue in such a remote location, Shackleton made a bold decision. He, along with 5 men, would sail in a small lifeboat, the James Caird, for over 800 miles to South Georgia, where there was a whaling station. This journey, considered one of the most extraordinary in the history of navigation, was undertaken in extremely dangerous conditions, with stormy seas, freezing winds, and a small boat that barely seemed capable of withstanding it. After 16 days at sea, battling storms and nearly dying from exhaustion, Shackleton and his men finally reached South Georgia. However, they were on the wrong side of the island, and Shackleton had to make a crossing on foot over the icy mountains to reach the whaling station. When they finally arrived, they were exhausted but alive. Without wasting time, Shackleton organized a rescue operation to save the men who had been left on Elephant Island. After several failed attempts due to thick ice, Shackleton finally managed to rescue his entire crew in August 1916, nearly 2 years after the expedition began. Against all odds, all 27 men survived. The Shackleton expedition was not a success in terms of achieving its original goal of crossing Antarctica, but it became one of the greatest stories of leadership, courage, and human endurance. Shackleton is remembered not for failing in his mission, but for being an exceptional leader in the face of adversity. He managed to keep his men alive in almost impossible circumstances, showing an extraordinary ability to make decisions and inspire those around him. The expedition is now seen as a powerful lesson in leadership and teamwork in times of crisis. Shackleton's name is synonymous with resilience and determination, and his story continues to inspire generations of explorers and leaders around the world. The history of the most disastrous and tragic expeditions shows us how far the human spirit is willing to go to explore the unknown, even in the face of immense risks. The desire to break new ground, face danger, and test the limits of human endurance is a trait that has defined many of the greatest journeys of exploration in history. The Franklin Expedition, the Donner Expedition, Robert Falcon Scott's race to the South Pole, the Dyatlov Pass mystery, and the Shackleton Expedition have something in common. They all demonstrate how the ambition to explore the unknown can lead to tragedy, but also immortality in the pages of history. In each of these expeditions, failure was not just an end, but also a powerful lesson about the dangers of the natural world and the limits of the human body and mind. These stories evoke an important reflection on what it means to be an explorer. The path to conquest can be full of unpredictable obstacles, and not all who set out into the unknown return successfully. However, what remains is the legacy of these adventurers. Their stories of courage, sacrifice, and endurance continue to inspire generations and remind us that the pursuit of the unknown, despite its inherent risks, is part of human nature. The tragedies we have seen here do not erase the impact of these expeditions on the collective imagination. On the contrary, they remind us that there is a price to be paid when we face the elements, when we challenge the environment, and venture known beyond boundaries. Yet, even in the face of death and failure, the will to move forward, to toughen, and to fight until the end is what makes these expeditions so remarkable. What do you think of these stories? Which of these expeditions impressed you the most? Leave your comments and share this video with those who also enjoy exploring the mysteries and tragedies of the past. See you in the next video, where we will continue to explore the most fascinating curiosities and stories in the world.